I wanted to be a nurse before I even knew the word for it. When I was 10, I used to watch my aunt shift between patients at the small clinic 2 blocks from our house, the way she spoke softly to strangers, the way she wiped a fevered forehead and made a child grin with a silly joke. I loved how she could take chaos and make it quiet. I loved that she could make someone feel less alone. Even as a kid, I practiced bandaging scraped knees with strips of cloth and narrated make-believe rounds to my stuffed animals. It felt like calling. Growing up, nothing in my neighborhood told kids they could be doctors or nurses. But my parents worked hard and they believed in schooling. They believed in steady, useful jobs. I took that belief and folded it into my own dream, like a piece of origami, careful, hopeful, fragile. I studied biology in high school, volunteered at the after-school clinic, and applied to nursing programs as soon as I graduated. Nothing felt more natural. But along the way my body and my dreams kept having arguments. Food became my refuge during stressful semesters and relationship breakups, during nights when rent was late and hope felt thin. One pizza slice turned into two into whole boxes, nights into a habit. It was comfort that came faster than conversation, a pause from the grinding worry. Weight crept up like a tide, small at first, then sudden, then overwhelming. By the time I was 24 and finally accepted into a nursing program, I was already carrying the kind of body that people notice first and listen to last. Walking into clinical orientation on that first day felt like stepping into a new life. The hospital smelled like bleach and lemon and possibility. Students clustered into groups, trading nervous jokes and stethoscopes. I had my backpack, my textbooks, and a badge with my name on it. I practiced my smile. I imagined the day I'd be the one giving calm instructions in an emergency, the one steadying a family. Reality, though, has a way of testing your most earnest imaginings. The first time I was asked to practice transferring a patient during lab, the room suddenly seemed smaller. We worked with dummies that weighed less than real people but were still the heaviest things I'd ever tried to lift. My instructor coached the group through proper body mechanics and safety protocols, and when it was my turn she put her hand gently on my arm and said, "You're doing fine, but remember, if you ever feel you can't safely lift a patient on your own, ask for help. It's about safety, not shame." I heard the words and nodded, but a cold pool opened under my ribs. Ask for help is reasonable advice, until the job you've wanted your whole life depends on the assumption that you can do it yourself. Clinicals demand stamina. You spend hours on your feet, moving from room to room, assisting people who are too fragile to move themselves. The first week I left with pain in my knees I'd never felt before. My feet ached. My back tightened. I stayed up at night thinking about the lifts I'd have to perform next week, imagining a patient's tiny hands gripping my sleeve and my own body refusing. There were whispers, too. Students gossip in hushed groups, it's human nature. Someone made a joke about who brought the buffet, and laughter followed like an aftershock. I tried to laugh along, but each snicker scraped. And then there were the practical humiliations that no one tells you about in the brochures, scrubs that didn't fit properly, the embarrassment of shirts that rode up and exposed the soft curve of my stomach, shoes that pinched because larger sizes were awkward and clunky. One day, a supply nurse handed me a pair of scrubs and hesitated, as if measuring the space in the fabric and measuring me in the same breath. I felt like an exhibit in a museum of other people's discomfort. The biggest blow came mid-semester during a clinical assessment. We were assigned to work a shift in a rehabilitation ward where many patients required assistance to transfer from bed to wheelchair. The head RN watched as students performed, and she graded on technique, speed, and independence. It was a practical exam, pass it and you move forward, fail and you repeat, at best. I remember the dummy's weight slamming into my forearms. I felt my legs brace, the muscles in my back pull. The RN came closer, watching my posture. "Call for assistance," she said in a quiet, practical tone. "Safety first." I froze. Asking for help in that room felt different than a casual request in a classroom. It felt like admitting I could not do the job. Other students completed the task and received nods. I asked for assistance. 2 classmates came over, quick and efficient, and together we managed the transfer. The RN marked the attendance form with a careful pen stroke and moved on to the next student. Later that evening I opened my email and my stomach dropped. My clinical instructor had written a note about my difficulty with patient lifting and recommended further physical evaluation and possible restrictions. The note used formal language about liability and patient safety, but the message read like a dismissal. I tried to reason with it. I told myself I could train harder. I enrolled in a gym and tried to learn how to strengthen my legs and core. The first day I walked onto the treadmill, the fluorescent gym lights seemed hostile and bright. People glanced. My thighs thundered with effort and my heart thudded so loud it felt like applause. I pushed for 10 minutes and then 15 and then a half hour, triumphant and shaking. The trainer praised my consistency and gave me modifications. But the body carries memory, and my joints remembered years of extra weight the way old machines remember dents. Academically I excelled. I could write care plans and explain pathophysiology until a clinician's eyes widened. I studied pharmacology with a fervor that made my professors smile. Teachers told me I had the empathy and reasoning that nursing needs. But when it came to the physical work of caregiving, there was a stubborn mismatch between my knowledge and my body's capability. That mismatch opened doors to comments I wasn't expecting. A clinical supervisor pulled me aside and, with a practiced calm, told me that while my assessments were excellent, the hospital's risk policies made it difficult to place me in certain wards without documented physical clearance. "We want you to succeed," she said, but the implication was clear. In certain roles, you need to be able to perform patient handling without putting yourself or patients at risk. The university suggested accommodations, assistive devices, team lifts, alternative placements in units with fewer manual handling requirements. I appreciated the effort, but the substitutions felt like a band-aid over the deeper wound. The ward I wanted to be in, the one with the ER noise and the delivery of life-or-death care, still felt out of reach. I could picture myself sitting by a crisis, heart in my throat, knowing the right thing to do but not being able to move with the speed the moment demanded. That fear was paralyzing. I remember the day the nursing board representative came to campus to speak about clinical expectations and licensure fitness. The room was full of students, notebooks open, the future spread out like a map. She spoke about physical demands, lifting, long hours, the need for agility in emergencies. She didn't know my name. She didn't know how many nights I'd spent praying I'd be able to do this job. Her words were clinical, but they landed like stones in my chest. After that talk I sat in my car for a long time, letting the parking lot lights halo the dashboard. I thought of leaving the program, of choosing a desk job in healthcare administration where bodies did not matter as much. I thought of every child I wanted to hold as a nurse, every elderly patient I wanted to steady. The dream wasn't a single wish, it was a mosaic of moments and faces. I felt the weight of one possibility, that my body could be the thing that denied me that future. But giving up didn't sit right with me. The word never had been part of my identity since childhood, never back down from a challenge, never let fear decide for me. So I made a plan that felt like taking a small, stubborn stand. I met with a physical therapist who specialized in occupational fitness for healthcare workers. We mapped out strengthening protocols tailored to my body, not punishments, but practical steps. I adjusted my diet the way a scientist adjusts a formula, one variable at a time. I learned to move strategically, how to pivot from the hips, how to recruit larger muscle groups, how to ask for help without letting it define my competence. Progress was glacial. There were weeks when the scale flatlined and my patience thinned. There were setbacks, a sprained ankle after a clumsy step, a day of binging when stress flared and the old comforts reached for me like familiar hands. Each episode felt like a test of whether I'd truly committed. But I kept going, because the alternative was returning to a life of watching through windows. The semester ended and my clinical evaluation returned in a different tone. The note still mentioned accommodations and the need for continued monitoring, but it also included a line I held like a small trophy: "Student demonstrates exceptional clinical judgment and dedication to improving physical competency." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a sign that the path forward was still my path to walk. I didn't expect the following months to test every ounce of willpower I had left. Progress was slower than I wanted, but every small win started to matter: climbing a flight of stairs without stopping, walking to class without knee pain, or finishing a full 8-hour shift without needing to sit down. Those moments felt like quiet victories no one could see, but they kept me going. At the same time, the emotional battle was harder than the physical one. When you live in a body that the world constantly reminds you is too much, you start carrying invisible weight along with the physical kind. There were days I'd look in the mirror before heading to clinicals and think, "You don't belong here. They're just waiting for you to fail." But then I'd remember the patients who smiled when I spoke to them softly, who didn't care what I looked like, only that I listened. Those moments reminded me why I was doing this. During one clinical rotation in a long-term care facility, I was assigned to a woman named Mrs. Harris. She was in her 80s, frail and mostly bedbound after a stroke. She told me one morning, "You know, dear, people think strength is just in the arms or the legs. But the strongest muscle you'll ever use is your heart." I smiled and nodded, but the words burrowed deep. I realized that maybe I'd been looking at my own struggle all wrong. Nursing wasn't about physical perfection, it was about compassion, persistence, and being present when others couldn't be. Still, the world around me didn't always see it that way. I remember a day when I was assisting another nurse with patient transfers, and a young intern whispered, "She's really trying, but it must be tough with her size." He didn't say it cruelly, but it hit like a slap. I wanted to disappear. But instead of crying that night, I went home and wrote in my journal, "They'll see the effort before they see the weight one day." That line became my promise to myself. Months passed, and so did several pounds. I began incorporating swimming into my routine because it felt freeing. In water, I wasn't heavy. I could move gracefully without pain or self-consciousness. Each morning, the sunrise reflected on the pool's surface like a quiet applause. I started seeing progress, not just in the mirror but in the way I moved, the way I carried myself, the confidence that began to return. My instructors noticed too. One of them, a woman named Claire, pulled me aside after a clinical shift and said, "You've changed, not just physically, but in how you handle patients. You've found your rhythm." That compliment was everything. For the first time, I didn't brush it off. I smiled and said, "Thank you, I've worked hard for this." Then came graduation. I remember standing in line with my classmates, wearing my uniform and holding my cap, trembling with nerves and pride. My parents sat in the front row, my mother wiping tears before my name was even called. When I stepped onto the stage, I wasn't thinking about my weight. I was thinking about every night I almost gave up, every rejection letter, every time I thought my body made me unworthy. I'd made it, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but honestly. But real life doesn't stop testing you once you've earned a title. My first job interview at a hospital ended with polite smiles and a "we'll be in touch," followed by silence. The next one, I heard the HR manager hesitate when discussing the physical demands of the role. "We just want to ensure all staff can handle emergency lifts and rapid response situations," she said. I nodded, understanding, but inside, frustration burned. It felt like my weight was still the first thing they saw, not my degree, not my skills, not my heart. I almost gave up nursing that year. I even drafted a resignation letter before I'd started my first real job. But then I got a call from a community clinic in a low-income neighborhood. They needed someone for a part-time position, someone patient, good with people, willing to take on multiple roles. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a big hospital. But it was real nursing. I accepted immediately. That clinic became my home. The patients didn't care what I looked like, they cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I treated them with dignity. There were days I'd work long hours helping mothers manage diabetes, or counseling teenagers about body image and health. Sometimes, when I walked a patient out the door, they'd smile and say, "You're easy to talk to." Those words healed parts of me no medicine ever could. Slowly, my confidence grew. I started sharing my journey online, not with fancy photos or weight loss slogans, but with honest reflections about what it meant to be in a bigger body in a world that expects smallness. To my surprise, people responded. Nurses from around the world wrote to say they understood, that they too had faced body shame and professional rejection. Some told me my posts inspired them to keep going. And that's when I realized something powerful. Maybe my journey wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about showing others that dreams aren't reserved for perfect bodies or flawless lives. Maybe it was about becoming the kind of nurse I'd needed when I was younger, someone who looked at you and saw your soul before your shape. Years later, I still remember that line from Mrs. Harris, "The strongest muscle you'll ever use is your heart." It's true. My heart carried me through judgment, through failure, through nights of pain and mornings of hope. Today, I'm not the skinniest nurse in the room, and maybe I never will be. But I am strong, capable, and proud of every step that brought me here. My weight stopped me once, but it didn't win. I became the nurse I always wanted to be, not because I was perfect, but because I never gave up. And if you're listening to this, doubting yourself because of how you look or what others say, remember this: your dream doesn't have an ideal weight. It just needs your will. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up anyway.